Hi, I'm Derek Desjardins, and welcome to the Lectory Perilous. Now, what if I told you that there was a 600-year empire that dissolved just about 100 years ago? And at its height, it spanned parts of Asia, Europe, and Africa. It acted as the interface between the Muslim and the Christian worlds. It represented the transition from the medieval world to the modern world, and in fact was responsible for the termination of the Roman Empire, created enduring art and architecture, and had one of its sultans, its 10th sultan, considered one of the most important leaders in world history. What if I also told you that your child in a K-12 public education is unlikely to hear anything about this, except for the fact that this empire was part of one of the sides in World War I. Now, of course, I'm talking about the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire occupies an incredibly critical part of world history. You can't really understand the flow of history, European or Asian, without knowing something about the Ottoman Empire. Yet, for a variety of reasons, it is unlikely to be taught with any degree of depth in public school, which means it's perfect for this channel, because my intent in this channel is to do exactly this, which is to point out topics and areas that your child might miss out on during his or her journey through public education, and is really worth supplementing in order to create a complete picture and develop cultural literacy. Now, I am not going to teach the Ottoman Empire, although at the end I will be doing a timelining activity, which I will be doing again and again and again in video after video, because creating timelines is that important for trying to untangle and unweave the knots of history in our head, in which lots of events and themes just tend to coalesce and overlap inappropriately. I will, however, be sharing resources. Now, my bind is I am going to be sharing resources for people who don't know a lot about the Ottoman Empire, but this could range from second grade to adults. So my caveat is this. While I'm not going to be teaching, I will be offering resources, but only you can decide on a course of action that is idiosyncratic to your situation. Are you a parent who is going to be facilitating the learning experiences for your child, a young child, middle school? Are you an older student in high school, maybe even an adult, and you feel like you've missed out on this topic? Where are you? What is it you need to do? And so you're going to basically have to make some decisions for yourself as to what you do with this knowledge, the knowledge of the fact that most people graduate high school without knowing a lot about the Ottoman Empire in this specific case. So let's talk about some resources first. Now, this video is going to take a little bit longer than future videos because I will be doing some little pedagogical side trips that I won't need to repeat ad nauseum video after video, but bear with me. Okay, I have a few of these, not this one specifically. I have a few atlases of world history. Now, atlases are critical. Students need to learn how to place themselves in space. The nice thing about historical atlases is they also show the flow of time and how political borders change. This one is by the published by the London Times. It's called A Complete History of the World, and I got it, I think, on a Barnes and Noble discount rack. so I didn't spend a lot of money on it. Here's the page on Ottoman Turkey. So again, I'm not going to be teaching content right now, but at a glance, you can see the critical geographical location, the crossroads of the Mediterranean that the Ottoman Empire occupied. Okay, so atlases. Atlases are pretty crucial for developing cultural literacy. Now, the first few times that you are exposed to a topic or your child is exposed to a topic, it's going to hang alone. It's not really going to make a lot of sense relative to other topics. But the tapestry does get woven over time, but this is a journey of years. What else would I recommend? More historical atlases. These are the penguin atlases. This one is of medieval history. This one is of modern history. I love these penguin atlases. Now, these were written by, I don't know if I'm going to get his name correct, Colin McEvedy. This gentleman is a real interesting character. I read up on him online. He's he's something else. But what's really nice about these is they do take the same view, in this case of Europe, focus on Europe. There's a little bit of Africa and a little bit of Asia. But you can see how the political borders change over time. So it really helps for students to get this kinematic sense that borders are not fixed. So one of the ideas that you're going to want to transmit. Self-education. I mentioned earlier that the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire is a critical figure in world history. Now, his name was Suleiman the Magnificent, Suleiman the First. Now, Westerners, Europeans, called him the Magnificent. His own people called him the Lawgiver, and that's part of what made him so important, is the way that he codified laws and really modernized the legal system. In addition to that, he was an excellent tactician, military leader. He was expansionistic. He expanded the borders, but he was also a patron of the arts. And so some of the magnificent structures and artworks you see if you go to Turkey today, they are largely due to Suleiman's patronage. This is by a series called Enthralling History. I really did enjoy this one. This was, you can just get through it in a few hours. And there's Suleiman's signature. They have lots of different titles for lots of different people. There's also one specifically on the Ottoman Empire. I ordered this one online, sight unseen, because there are not a lot of resources about the Ottoman Empire for younger children. Now, this one purports to be history for 5th grade, and it's by a company called Baby Professor. It's a nice book. It's very colorful. It's got a large font, so it's not overwhelming for young children. I think based on the content and the reading level here, I'd be comfortable giving my 3rd grade students. Now, my students tend to be a little more advanced, but I feel comfortable giving this to my 3rd graders. Nothing in here seems distressing or inappropriate. And in the back we have, there's Suleiman, and photographs, important dates. It's a nice resource. This one is a little bit different. Who's this? Ethan Braxton. He has a whole series of these child journeys to different cultures, different parts of the world. This is a children's journey to the Ottoman Empire. Now, this is more like fantasy art. You can see the exaggerated colors. It is quite beautiful and immersive. However, I would avoid reading some of these tortured quatrains. Mr. Braxton may be a good artist, but he is not a great poet. this one's okay. Now, the next resource is outstanding. Now, this is marketed as the adventure magazine for young historians, and it's called Honest History. This one really surprised me. I read some reviews online, and I again ordered this one sight unseen and was mightily impressed. In fact, of all the resources I've shown you, I would say that this would be the one I would lead with. And it's a good resource for varying age groups. I mean, as an adult, if you feel that you're coming from a point of minimal knowledge, this is really an appropriate introduction. But I would also feel comfortable giving this to a 4th or 5th grader. Again, we've got Suleiman on the cover. Now, why do I keep focusing on Suleiman? Because biographies matter, particularly if a time period has an outstanding figure or a few outstanding figures, because humans tend to think in terms of narrative of their own lives. And so if you can anchor an individual inside your topic, it's more likely that some of those ideas are going to be encoded more deeply. So I would always recommend that some kind of biographical narrative be included in your study or your child's study. So for the 600-year span of the Ottoman Empire, Suleiman the Magnificent is the one to go with. Now, the last resource I'm going to show you from a distance. I will focus on these resources in more detail in future videos. But let me just shift my camera a little bit, and you'll see what looks like some modern art over there. Looks like just a bunch of small rectangles. That is actually a timeline, and this is a timeline of Asian royal families. And at the top of it, it goes from about the year 600 down to the present day. Now, I have several of these. This is designed by a company called Useful Charts. Now, I don't get any financial remuneration for mentioning anything on this channel. In fact, the people at Useful Charts don't even know I exist yet. I love their work. It's very, very detailed and incredibly magnetic and engaging for students and adults. I brought one of these in on a whim last year into my classroom. It was Western European royal families. And I'm not exaggerating when I said almost any time there was some ragged or free time in class, the beginning of class, at the end of class, during transitions, there would be a cluster of students around this timeline. Timelines really draw people in because they represent, I think, a good tool for organizing thoughts. And basically, humans being pattern-seeking creatures, this is a tailor-made way to help organize time. And this is why at the end of this video, I'm going to introduce you to a timelining activity. It's not going to look anything like that. It's going to be far simpler, but timelining is going to be one of our tried and true tools. So Useful Charts, love them. All right, so I've showed you some resources. Ottoman Empire, despite its importance, doesn't have a lot of good resources for young children. Now, of course, there's the whole world of the internet out there. There's YouTube and a variety of resources that you can look up videos by experts. However, I think students should earn videos. Always reading first, writing first, taking notes, and then the video after. Students really need to be, I think, reacclimated to the book as the primary tool of learning. I'm kind of old-fashioned in that regard. I do have some reasons for being old-fashioned in that regard, and again, I will hope to go over that in a future video. But Much like they always say, read the book before you see the movie, I say, read the book before you watch the instructional video. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not against watching videos to supplement, but I don't think watching videos is education. So I'm going to move on to an actual activity, developing a timeline, and we're going to be placing the Ottoman Empire on this timeline. We're going to be placing Suleiman the Magnificent on this timeline. We're also going to be placing the collapse of Constantinople and consequently the Byzantine Empire on there. And I'm going to talk through the development of the timeline as if I was teaching a class. I will stop every now and then for these occasional pedagogical asides. But for the most part, this is something I would do in my classroom. And it's only going to require that you have a ruler, a pencil, and a blank piece of paper like computer paper. So go ahead, gather those materials, and I will see you in a second. Okay, now for the fun part, we are going to make a timeline. Now, the timeline I'm going to show you today is very simple. It's just going to use this piece of paper, ruler, and I'm going to use a marker just so you can see, but my students are in a classroom. I would, of course, recommend using a pencil, maybe a marker later on for outlining or coloring after the pencil work has been done, but I want this to show up on camera. And I call this a 10-section timeline. I'm pretty sure I didn't invent this. I've not seen it anywhere else, but I'm pretty sure someone else has to have come up with this idea. So I'm not taking credit for anything original here. Maybe it is original. Okay, now we are going to fold this paper lengthwise. This in and of itself can be an adventure for some kids because they, for some reason, do not want to crease with their fingernails, or they may have difficulty lining up the corners. So keep an eye on your own child, see how that goes. And now I have an 11-inch crease. I'm going to be using 10 of those inches. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to put my ruler at the 1/2 inch mark on the top, and I'm going to put it at the 11.5 inch mark on the bottom. And then starting at the 1, I'm going to drag down to the 11. Now we have a 10-inch line segment that I'm going to mark at each whole inch. Now, because of my angle relative to the paper, I'm doing this obliquely, so I hope it's somewhat accurate. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, hence why I call the 10-section timeline. Now, I want this timeline to be 5,000 years today. Does it have to be 5,000 years? No, of course not. If you want it to be 10 years, it could be a 10-year timeline. Each one of these intervals could be 1 year. It could be a 5-year timeline. Each one of these is half a year. Or it could be a 10 million year timeline. It's really up to you. Additionally, if I wanted to use more than one piece of paper, students can always tape paper end to end, but that tends to get a little chaotic. Just depends. All right. So I'm going to follow the convention of my poster, my useful charts poster. I'm going to keep it vertical, though of course you could do it horizontal. And I'm going to put the older dates on the top and the more recent dates on the bottom. Now I want this to be present day, and just to make it easy to work with, I'm going to call the present day the year 2000. I'm writing large. I would not be writing this large if I was just doing this for myself. 2000, now I'm going to go back 500 years each time. So each interval is going to be 500 years, and when all is said and done, this will span 5,000 years. Then I go to the year 1000, 500, and then I get to an interesting position here. There is no year 0, really. What this is your AD BC crossover, or if you prefer, CE BCE. I do have this discussion with my students. I explain what the terms mean, and at the end of the day, I let them pick what they want to use. So how are we going to indicate that? Well, how about we put AD/CE on this side of the mark, and we'll put BC/BCE over here, and that gives you some some choices for your own timelines or for instructing your child. Now we're going to go back. So if this was a 0, right here we are at minus 500 or 500 BC, 1000, and we're just going to keep going by 500s until we get to the year 3000. Why 3000? Well, that's where pretty much written records start. So that is what is technically considered the beginning of history. Now, of course, there were many events involving humankind well before the year 3000 BC, but we're going to be mainly focusing on history. And so I'm going to use this as my arbitrary starting point, the year 3000 BC. Okay, so have ourselves a nice timeline here. Now what we're going to do is, for this video, we're going to place some events with the Ottoman Empire. I just grabbed a purple here. You can do this however you like. Colored pencils, crayons, pencil alone, patterns, negotiate it with your child. All right, now I'm going to put some extra notes on the side here. You could do that. Have a notebook as an adjunct on the side. Again, I can't exactly prescribe how things are going to work for you, but I would generally have students taking notes and then transferring information from notes onto the timeline, but I also do encourage them to annotate the timeline as well. Timelines will get filled up pretty quickly, and then you make a new one, and you decide what kind of information do you want to bring over, or what is useful information to include. This first one, when we put the, I think I said Sumerian earlier, I meant Ottoman. When we put the Ottoman Empire on here, we are going to, it's going to stand alone. And it doesn't really get very interesting until you start seeing how events and people interact with one another. So I mentioned earlier that the Ottoman Empire, OE, started in the year 1299, which is pretty much firmly in the medieval era, and ended up dissolving in 1923, which is recent history, just close to 100 years ago. Now, how are we going to find our beginning and our ends, and how are we going to indicate that? Again, that's up to you, but since we have the dates labeled, on the top, I'm going to put my information underneath it. So 1299. Well, 1299 is going to be between 1000 and 1500. Now, this is a great opportunity to take side trips into mathematics and fractions. One of the things students tend to have difficulty with early on, if we're talking about the imperial system, is they think each one of the 16ths is a 0.1. So 1 and 2/16 they'll call 1.2. This is a really tough idea to get across to primary students, but I do start getting into more detail with my older kids about 16ths not being tenths, while on the other side of your ruler you actually are dealing with tenths, which is one distinct advantage of the metric system. But we started with inches, so we're going to continue with inches. So if I have between 1000 and 1500, 500 years, this half-inch mark here is going to be what? Well, 250 years. This is going to be the year 1250. So really 1299 isn't too far after that. And we're not here, because of this scale, we can't go for too much precision. So this is going to be our starting point for the Ottoman Empire. And 1923, well, if we use the same methodology, halfway here is going to be 1500 plus 250 years, which is going to be 1750. And if I add another 1/4 of an inch to get up to 3/4 of an inch, that's going to be adding another 125. So this is an opportunity to do a little side math with your child. 1500 plus 250 plus 125. And then if your child is young and starting out with carrying and multi-digit addition and things we don't have to carry here, fortunately. We end up at 1875. So 3/4 of an inch is 1875. So just a little bit after that is close enough to 1923 to represent our Ottoman Empire. Now, what would I have the kids do? If their fine motor skills were good enough, I would have them write Ottoman Empire here. Or, they could do some kind of key. This equals the Ottoman Empire. Lots of different ways to do it. Now, Suleiman the Magnificent lived during the Golden Age. In fact, he was responsible for the Golden Age of the Ottoman Empire. And so he was 1520 to 1566. Do I want to include him on here? I might. I might not, but since you will be taking a side trip into a good amount of narrative about Suleiman, I'll put him here, and maybe I'll write his name over here. I'm just trying to get across to you the idea of thinking through the process and making decisions is the important part, not what it ends up looking like. Okay. Now, dates. What kind of dates do we need to memorize in our life? Now, of course, we should know 1776, and we should know 1066, and we should know 1492. But there's another date that tends to fall through the cracks a lot, and I think it's one of those essential dates that we need to know, and that's 1453. Okay, so 1453, let's estimate, it's going to be pretty close to 1500, so let's just put it here, 1453. Now, why do we need to know this date? This was the year that the Ottoman Empire conquered the Byzantine Empire, essentially bringing an end to Roman civilization. The Byzantines did not call themselves Byzantines. That's a later title for the people who lived within the empire. They considered themselves Romans, and they were. They were continuation of the Roman Empire in the East. So 1453 presents a real interesting date, and many people consider it the end of medievalism and the movement into modernity. Now, 1453 is close enough to 1500 that I'm going to round. And I'm going to say that the modern era runs from 1500 to the present day. This is what I'm talking about. I'm going to run out of room. I'm going to start colliding with other things. Okay, modern era. A popular date for the collapse of the Western Roman Empire as opposed to the Eastern Roman Empire. Some historians say 476, but again, this rounds really nicely to 500. So this 1,000 year period here from 500 to 1500, I think this is a good mental organizer for medieval. Well, what does that mean? It means anything that preceded it is considered the ancient world. These are all pretty interesting discussions to have as to, is there a true beginning and end date? Do some civilizations remain in the ancient phase while other civilizations are moving to medievalism? This is much more detailed than we need to get at this point. And in fact, if in studying the Ottoman Empire, you come away with the notion that it's a fairly recent empire, it had a very important figure in Suleiman the Magnificent, and you are now able to make a distinction between the last 500 years, which is the modern era, this middle 1,000 years here, which is the medieval era, and the time that preceded it, which is considered ancient, you have really set a great foundation and provided a great framework for hanging all sorts of other important ideas to your learning. And that's the point of this. The timeline itself, what it ends up looking like, that's not the point. The point is the understandings that comes from creating the timeline. And you'll notice this timeline already is pretty busy. I might be able to fit a couple of other things on here, but in my next one, I might just start over and just plunk down the Ottoman Empire or not. It depends on what my next topic is going to be. And what is that going to be? Well, you're just going to have to come back and visit, and we're going to visit another idea which is unlikely for your child to learn in any depth in public school, but is also pretty darn important. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.